Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Grolnok the Omnivore. It is 2 green-blue for a 3/3 legendary creature frog. It has, whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. Whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from your library, exile it with a Croak counter on it. You may play land cards and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with Croak counters on them. This is going to be a self-mill deck with a frog and combo subtheme. We'll be milling ourselves and getting value while we do. We'll be running the best frogs and shapeshifters for that added synergy with Grolnok. Then we'll also go over some powerful game-winning combos when we get to our wincons section. First up is our Frog Matters section. These are the best frogs and cards that count as frogs out there. Personally, I'd keep it to the best ones, until at least frogs get the full support that the tribe deserves. Fortunately, there are some decent shapeshifters to fill the holes in our deck. We do get a decent bit of interaction with those cards, with Vandal being a solid answer to an artifact or an enchantment, and Froghemoth doing a decent job of nixing any opposing graveyard decks. Possibly the best way to make the most of the frog claws on Grolnok is by turning a whole board into frogs with cards like Arcane Adaptation, Maskwood Nexus, and Xenograft. We'll be running some token makers in our wincons section, so when we go over those, do keep these cards in mind. In this deck, self-mill and card draw will basically be the same thing. The best cards for the deck will do a little bit of both. Cards like Mental Note replace themselves while milling things into the graveyard. Fact or Fiction is this but bigger. And then Court of Grace makes us the Monarch to draw us cards, and then we can use it to mill us for a huge amount. After those, there are some straight mill cards, from cheap spells like Hedron Crab, all the way up to bigger spells like Traumatize, so we always have something to do all throughout the game. We can then look at running some cards that mill, but also have some added utility. Crawling Sensation can help us make a board state as we mill some lands, and Tamiyo, Collector of Tales, can mill and then also bring something important back from the graveyard in case we end up milling without Grolnok out. Moving over to some more dramatic ways of milling, we have some combos. Mesmeric Orb is great in the deck by itself, but if we have Basalt Monolith out, we can mill our whole deck. This is because Basalt Monolith can tap and then untap itself repeatedly. This triggers Mesmeric Orb, meaning we can mill as many cards as we want. To a similar end, if we have another creature out alongside Cephalid Illusionist, we can equip something with 0 equip cost, like Shuko, back and forth between the two creatures. We can do this as many times as we want. Each time we equip to Cephalid Illusionist, we'll mill 3 cards, and we can do this repeatedly. Even more severe than these is Hermit Druid. If you run it in a deck with basic lands, then it should mill you a decent amount each time. The degenerate move, however, is to run it in a deck with no basics. That build obviously comes with some drawbacks, but it is something you can consider. Moving over to our ramp, as we're in green we have some good options available to us. Starting off with our mana dorks, there'll be solid early plays that can ramp us ahead. We also have cards like Deranged Assistant and Millicolin that also help us mill, so are worth the extra mana to cast. After those, we can look at some cards that let us play multiple lands per turn. Because we can play lands from exile that were milled when we have our commander out, it will mean it's very unlikely we're ever going to be short of additional land drops. These should allow us to ramp really quickly, and because of these, we'll also be able to run some landfall cards when we get to our wincons. For our interaction, we have a decent selection available to us in Simic. First up is spells that remove a threat and leave something behind. These are always really solid in Commander and trade up without too much issue. The fact Rapid Hybridization leaves a frog behind gives it some extra play, as we can use it on one of our own creatures if we need some extra mill. Some of the other best cards in these colours for removal are cards like Kenneth's Transformation and Imprisoned in the Moon. Being able to nerf a commander is really strong, especially as more and more decks revolve heavily around their commander. For some board wipes, we have cards like Curse of the Swine and Oversimplify. Like the spot removal, most board wipes in these colours leave something behind, but they're still really solid and definitely worth including. Another kind of board wipe that gets way better in this deck is Polymorphous Jest. This can easily save us at the right moment, or it can turn our own board of tokens into frogs for some additional self-milling when they attack. There's a few different types of protection that we'll want to run in this deck. First and foremost, we want to protect our commander. Lightning Greaves and Swiffer Boots will always be solid includes for this. The other way we can protect our board and some of our key pieces is with counterspells. These might overlap with our interaction, but generally speaking you're mainly looking to stop targeted removal and board wipes that try and ruin our day. Let's move over to some dedicated ways of winning the game. First up is Labman effects, that win us the game when we don't have any cards left in our library. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise to anyone who noticed all the infinite mill combos that we've already gone over. With all the milling, these will let us win the game on the spot. They'll work really nicely with our commander, as we can mill them into exile and then recast them whenever we need to. These are also cards that we really want to protect as well with our counter magic. A more traditional way of winning the game is by hitting people in the face. We can do that with all those landfall triggers that we spoke about earlier. Playing multiple lands per turn, triggering a Scout Swarm, or any other of these effects will generate us a ton of tokens. When you combine this with things that turn everything into frogs, then we'll also get a ton of mill as well. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, there's a couple of nice effects that we can look at. First up, you can look at some lands that help with the milling, with Ipnu Rivulet and Cephalid Colosseum being good choices. There are also cards like Alchemist Refuge and Emergent Zone that can let us play things at instant speed, which can really help out with those combos, as it means we can surprise our opponents so they don't have as much time to react. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.